Hi, this is Len Edgerly. Welcome to the Kindle Chronicles. Today is Valentine's Day, February 14th, 2020, and I am in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and I need to get this episode up because I'm headed to Logan Airport to pick Darlene up. She's going to be arriving after about 4 days in Denver, visiting with a friend while I've been here in Cambridge, and I was up in New Hampshire to do some work related to the New Hampshire primary. That's where I had a conversation with my guest this week, Gary Lerude, who lives in Nashua, where I was working, and I'll tell you about him in a little bit. Also let you know that I'm going to have 2 tech tips in this episode before we get to the interview, and I'll tell you about next week's show at the end. First tech tip comes from listener Tom Semple, and this is related to the tip that I passed along last week about Kindle books and how you can read them with Alexa devices. I forgot to turn them off here. Hi, Len. Thanks for reporting the Read Kindle Books with Alexa app. I don't have any Echo devices running anymore, Tom says, so I haven't kept up with the Alexa app and had even uninstalled it. And I never really used Echo devices for reading books except to try it a couple of times. But I think I'll actually use this for workouts and long drives, and maybe instead of iOS speak screen feature, following along in the text with the Kindle app or an actual Kindle device. Kindle app support for speak screen has regressed since iOS 13. It no longer reads continuously past page boundaries unless you have the speech controller turned on. The Kindle app has never supported text highlighting for speak screen as Apple Books does. And unlike Alexa, speak screen playback cannot be controlled with voice or headset controls. You have to interact with speech controller directly. It's also a way to stream audiobooks that are not downloaded on the device. The Audible app for iOS and Android needs to download in order to listen to the book. And it should also work with the Alexa or Fire Android app, but I've not had a chance to try it yet. Best, Tom. Tom, thanks for pointing out the comparisons with the speech capability speak screen. I haven't used that on my iPhone, but there's some interesting comparisons between that and reading books, Kindle books with Alexa. One thing I've noticed in using that way of reading books, using mainly Echo Auto in the Tesla, it's very nice, and the voice is getting better and better. It's a much more natural voice than the kind of the computerized text-to-speech of old. But it does have a quirk, and it may be related to what Tom mentions here, because it seems like whenever the Alexa voice gets to the end of a page, there's quite an abrupt pause, and it can break a sentence, and it can make the reading of the book really interrupts it, and it's not great. It's a flaw in that particular capability of the Alexa to read the book. I mean, you can, once you know what's happening, you get used to it, but there's some kind of a quirk when it reaches the end of a page that they probably need to fix. Also heard from John, who wrote, "Hi, Len. I'm a big fan of your podcast. Very grateful for all the Kindle information you bring to your listeners. Your tech tip that allowed me to merge my Echo Auto with my Apple podcast so it remembers where it left off was life-changing for me. At any rate, the reason I'm emailing you is to inform you about some new beta features in Readwise." Now, that's another product that I've talked about, and it's a web tool which enables you to pull down highlights that you've made in all of your Kindle books and deliver them to you as emails. I get one every day, and I can look back on things that I've highlighted. John writes, "You mentioned that you use it in one of your podcasts. I have about 2,000 ebooks and am a big highlighter," he writes. "I find it a lot of fun getting highlights from books I forgot I had and often find it enjoyable to go back and revisit the book. Readwise has added some new beta features in its app. The one I find as very cool is the feature that allows it to scan a page of a physical book like OCR, optical character reading, and then use the app on your iPhone to highlight the text you want to keep and send it to Readwise. Just thought I'd I'd mentioned it to you so you were aware of it. Thanks again for your terrific podcast, John. I hadn't caught up with that. The Readwise people are really working, always improving that app. It's getting better and better, and I keep reaching out to them hoping I'll get somebody on the show to talk to me, and they keep being shy about it, but maybe one of these days we'll have one of the developers on and they'll talk about the philosophy behind helping people to have access to their highlights in such a really elegant way. It's very well done, and you can find it at readwise.io if you're interested. Gary Lerude, that's spelled Lerude, and I met at PodCamp Boston in July of 2008. In looking back on my notes, I think that we met just a few days before I released the first episode of the Kindle Chronicles on July 26th of 2008. And we had one of those memorable conversations. We met in the hallway at the place where PodCamp Boston was held and had a conversation. I left thinking, boy, that's a really interesting guy. I'd like to stay in touch with him. And we have over the years by email. And then I finally did have a chance to meet him in person at his home in Nashua. Gary is a graduate of the University of Denver, which is known as DU, in Denver, Colorado. That's in 1975 when he earned a Bachelor of Science degree in electrical engineering. He worked at Texas Instruments for 19 years, followed by strategic marketing and related positions in 2 other technology companies. And since 2014, he has worked as technical editor at Microwave Journal. We get together the day after the primary, and I was up there doing some work on the primary. And when I got to the house in a pleasant neighborhood in the outskirts of Nashua, he came out to greet me at the car coming down the sidewalk. And then as we went back into the house, he introduced me to his wife, Lori. She was leaving to go do some errands. I'm not sure exactly where. And as we left, she looked at us both and said, "You boys have fun." And I think I kind of recognize an echo of the way Darlene looks at some of my technology activities. And it was a pleasant moment where she knew that these 2 characters are going to be geeking out and having a great time talking about things and recording a show. And in the living room, Gary had set up a wonderful array of equipment, 2 high-quality microphones on boom mics and an audio interface, which enabled me to just plug my computer in and record our conversation in Logic Pro. And it was all just ready to go and very high quality. You'll really appreciate the quality of the audio in our conversation. I noticed as we started that he had a meditation bell on the coffee table. I was on the couch and he was in a chair nearby. So I suggested that maybe as we started, I could ring the bell and we would simply sit for 10 minutes in silence before we had our conversation. And I figured he'd be amenable to it because I knew he was a meditator. And so this is a first. I've never done this before, an interview, and I really liked it. I just had this chance to settle down, and I was watching the shadows and the light play underneath the coffee table and admiring the trees outside and really preparing. I don't know exactly what gets pruned away during that kind of a sit. And we talk about it in the interview, so we'll have a little exploration of it. But I'll start with the 3 chimes of the bell, which I rang at the end of our 10 minutes, and then this is the conversation that we had. Well, there's a first, starting a Kindle Chronicles conversation with the bell. I first have to ask you, what is it like to live in New Hampshire in a presidential year? I came up here to work for a candidate, and I've been calling into New Hampshire even when we were back in Denver. Do you just feel like you're besieged in these events?
In some cases, I mean, we tend to get a lot of the candidates coming by or their representatives knocking on doors, and my strategy is not to answer the phone because it's usually a candidate or more likely a polling firm. But there are tremendous opportunities. I mean, virtually every week during the primary season, you can go and listen, be in somebody's living room while a candidate is talking. In a few cases, I think like in 2012 with Barack Obama, given his position, you couldn't find a small venue with him. You had to go to a gymnasium or something. But we have some friends who have a photo of their young daughter. They were at a restaurant downtown. So the young daughter, the two of them, and Barack Obama, this was 2007 or 8 before, he became president.
Yeah.
And so that's a keepsake. But it's an amazing experience. I understand the concerns people have that New Hampshire is not very demographically diverse in terms of the country. But I think that the good part of the system, whether it's in New Hampshire or somewhere else, is you need people to have the opportunity to speak with the candidates, to see them, not just get these 30-second blasts on TV or on your website, but to really probe and compare and contrast the views that they have. And I think New Hampshire is a great place to do that.
Yeah, I think that in Iowa similarly, because it's almost like you're preserving a human connection and a human assessment, even in this age when obviously there'd be so many other ways to encounter people.
Right. And I mean, it's interesting with, Mike Bloomberg is running and has a totally different strategy. He's going for the Super Tuesday states, but there's no way to go to California and meet people in small venues. I mean, he obviously could, a few people, but in terms of a percentage of the population, that you can't market to somebody that way. So that's where Iowa, New Hampshire, to some extent, maybe Nevada, South Carolina, offer similar things. So I could see preserving that in a number of small states. Maybe you have a primary on the same day, although that puts stress on the candidates because how can they get around to all those places? But it's an interesting system.
Well, congratulations on having survived it and resuming normal life.
Yes, until the fall comes and then it heats up again.
Yeah, because New Hampshire is usually one of the states in play.
Yeah.
Well, I was when I was thinking about talking with you and reading about what you've done. We're pretty much contemporaries. I think you're about 3 years younger than I am, roughly.
Right.
And so, in 1975, when you were graduating from University of Denver, and you had a BS degree in electrical engineering. 3 years earlier, I had graduated from college, and I was heading into the newspaper world, the media world. And so I was going to ask you, well, how is the world of wireless technology and all of the technology that ended up defining your career changed since that time? And then I thought, boy, if somebody asked me about that, my first newspaper job, I was writing on a typewriter, and the type was being set in lead down in the composing room. There was no internet. There was no anything. And it's almost a ridiculous question to think about how much things have changed in that period. But can you look at the arc of the technology that you've been involved with your whole career and tell kind of a story of what has happened and the importance of it?
Yeah, certainly from the perspective or the role that I've played and what I've seen, coming out of school, mainframe computers were used for analysis. We would fill out card decks. The company I was working for, Texas Instruments, had its own homegrown software. Invariably, you'd fill out the card deck wrong a couple times. You'd have stupid typographical errors. And you were lucky if you could do 2 or 3 runs a week, where now, you can do runs in hours. And the sophistication of the modeling is so much greater with what they call electromagnetic simulation. So that was one dimension. Obviously, the complexity of computing power is all dependent on being able to shrink the semiconductor process, but then on the design side, being able to accurately develop a product. Because if you're designing a 1 billion transistor computer, if you mess up, it's an incredibly expensive and long time period.
Yeah.
On the wireless side, when I started in the industry, most of the applications were military related, military radar, what's called electronic warfare, that sort of thing. It was really maybe in the mid-'80s, you started to see some emergence of commercial for satellite TV. In the mid-'90s, you had cellular starting, and cellular has really been the engine that's propelled the industry that I'm involved in forward, starting with the original analog phones, and now, of course, we're talking about 5G systems. And that has, kind of like in the silicon world, changed the driver of the technology to the commercial world as opposed to where it was in the military world.
When I think of wireless, I feel like I have this clumsy ability to hook up a Bluetooth device, figure out a Wi-Fi network in my home, and now I'm hearing about 5G as something that's going to change everything. From that sort of a real rookie's view of what's happening wirelessly, to start with, what's the difference between Bluetooth and Wi-Fi?
So Bluetooth is envisioned as sort of a very close-in wireless network. So from your phone to a pair of headphones, something like that, you can test it out. If you put your Bluetooth headphones on and leave your phone in one place and walk somewhere in the house or outside, at some point you lose connection. And that's sort of the effective range of Bluetooth. Wi-Fi was intended to be more of a wireless network for engaging computers and, of course, now cell phones, a lot of data traffic. And so a lot of companies, I would say today, most people connect to their networks via Wi-Fi as opposed to the old Ethernet. And it's also known as wireless local area network. So it's got longer range. And then cellular is much wider in terms of its coverage. I mean, obviously you can be across the world and make a cellular call or send a text or whatever, and it connects seemingly magically back to wherever you want to go. So there, at some level, you can define the differences based on the ranges they cover.
And the cellular, that's much further distance than in a home, because you have to. If I pick up my phone now, it's communicating with a tower somewhere in this. How far away could it be away and still work?
Well, it depending on the type of cell tower and the system, I mean, several miles for sure. Maybe 5 miles in some cases, rural areas, that might not be a bad estimate.
And then how about 5G? What dimensions does that change?
Well, if you look at the generations of cellular, it started out with analog, and then GSM, which was kind of considered 2G, and then there was 3G and there was 4G. So the latest version, 5G, the vision for it is it will increase the data rates that you have on your phone right now. And I think we're all used to being able to connect to the web or even watch videos on our phones. So 5G should give us more data. So as the video resolution gets denser to 4K or whatever, you can get that streaming experience. The other aspect is 5G is supposed to have what's called very low latency. And that basically means if you send a text from your phone, how long does it sort of take to get to the network? And if the network was immediately responding, how long does it take to get back? And today, that may be 30, 40, 50 milliseconds. Well, they're talking about getting down below 10, maybe to 1 millisecond.
Wow.
Well, you say, well, so big deal. What does that do? Well, theoretically, it's important for gaming, if you're a gamer. Mm-hmm. But they're talking about applications like remote surgery. Mm-hmm. So you may have the best heart surgeon in the world based in, say, Boston, and using a 5G network, some kind of surgery, robotic surgery in, say, West Virginia, where somebody in West Virginia doesn't have to come to Boston to get the surgery. So that's one of the things that's envisioned. Also, there's a lot of talk about autonomous driving, cars that can drive themselves, so to speak. Well, part of the network to make that happen would be connections to the cellular network. And of course, if you're going down the highway at 70 miles an hour, you don't want to have a lot of delay if you need to get a signal back to the car. So that's where the low latency comes into play. And then the third aspect of 5G is what they call massive machine-type communications. So that's like the Internet of Things. Some of the things that, say, in your home controls your thermostat. There may be things that a company has in their factory that monitors temperature, or particularly out in the field. How do you connect all these things back to the central cloud computer? Well, 5G would enable the system to do that because it could handle millions of connections and provide good service, good support.
It seems like I see sometimes on my iPhone, it'll say LTE, the various messages as to what kind of a network I'm on. Sometimes it seems like I see 5G, but am I really getting 5G when I see 5G on my phone?
So you've got AT&T?
Yeah.
Okay. So I think that's what they called 5G evolution.
Oh.
And it's really an advanced form of 4G that a lot of the AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile, Sprint, they're all developing and deploying. And AT&T got a lot of flack for sort of hyping, saying it was 5G, but it's really not 5G.
Ah.
So it does indicate you should be getting better service, mainly in terms of speed.
I see. And then I read something in your magazine. What's the name of the magazine?
Microwave Journal.
That 5G, this might be the Christmas to get a 5G phone. So what does it mean to get a 5G phone and possibly this year? I mean, as an early adopter, if there's something I need to get to be current, I want to know about it.
My sense is, of course, you're kind of tied to iPhone refresh cycles. Mm-hmm. I don't know if we'll see in the fall an iPhone with 5G.
The phone
TBD.
Itself has to have some differences.
Yes, it has to have. Now, without getting too complex, part of 5G is a lot of new frequency bands are being developed, or allocated is probably the better word to use 5G. In the U.S., I would say we're a little bit behind where the rest of the world is in terms of allocating spectrum that's similar to the spectrum that you use for cellular. The U.S., the FCC has taken a strong position to deploy what's called millimeter wave spectrum. So that's above 20 gigahertz. The difficulty with that is that has limited range. And it also, because of the characteristics of the propagation and the circuitry inside, it's going to be fairly power intensive on your battery, although people that are developing chipsets for this say, oh no, that's not the case. But I think it's for millimeter wave, we're not going to see a lot of deployment. Perhaps in Denver where you are, or maybe in Cambridge, you might see it because companies are starting to deploy it. But I think it's going to take a couple years for millimeter wave to really settle out. Now, they're also starting to deploy below 6 gigahertz in this cellular Wi-Fi band. And some of those frequencies are limited in the bandwidth that they have. Some, the FCC is trying to allocate new spectrum. I think personally in the U.S., 2021 is probably a better year to buy a 5G phone than 2020.
Interesting. Another topic which came up, and this is at the Amazon new products briefing in September. They talked about Amazon Sidewalk, and in my layman's understanding of it, they were saying, okay, your Bluetooth device will work in this kind of a distance, and Wi-Fi works for a different distance, and there's an intermediate area. They use the idea of some kind of an IoT device on a dog, where if the dog wanders out in the neighborhood, you can still somehow be connected. But what's your understanding of what they're working on and the significance of it?
It's an interesting concept. I haven't heard too much about it other than the initial announcement. If you look at, that would fall under the umbrella of what I would call the Internet of Things. And the cellular people are working very hard to try to incorporate Internet of Things technology and connections into the cellular network, so you wouldn't have any reason to go away from AT&T or Verizon. There are some companies, one called Sigfox, one called LoRa, that are developing their own standards and their own networks. And these can be useful where you don't have a lot of data that you have to send. It's not like you'd be sending video. You might be sending temperature or pressure or something like that, and it could be somewhere in the world, like on a container ship or something. So I think Sidewalk is kind of borrows from some of those low data rate technologies. As I understand it, it uses the unlicensed 900 megahertz band. And it's not envisioned necessarily to be a global thing. You couldn't find your dog if it wandered off to California, but maybe you could. But it would certainly be more neighborhood. But it's an interesting application, and I think we'll see more applications like that as the years go by.
And it sounded like there's they don't have to apply for licensing or anything. It's just a protocol which they're saying they'll share with other people.
Right.
And
yeah, if they use one of the unlicensed bands, so 900 megahertz is one, the 2.4 gigahertz band for Wi-Fi, the 5 gigahertz band for Wi-Fi, those are all unlicensed. So people can deploy systems in those bands. They don't have to go to the FCC to get a license. They do have to obey certain regulations in terms of power and that sort of thing, because you don't want them interfering with other activities or applications. But yeah, Amazon could certainly deploy it, and if they make it widely available as a standard, could well be adopted.
You shared in an email a while back that when you first heard my father talk in a conversation we had about how he reads on his phone, you thought, well, the phones are too small. I just can't ever do that. And then you got an iPhone 7 Plus, and you tried reading on your phone, and it turns out you enjoyed it, and it made you think how easily you had dismissed that possibility, and then how easily it became natural to you. I'll start by saying, what amount of your reading do you think you're currently doing now on your phone?
That's a good question. Maybe half, maybe a little bit less than half. I think I've gone back to my Paperwhite, at least for book reading. But for a lot of other articles and that sort of thing, I definitely on the phone. And it's more convenient. I don't have my Paperwhite with me all the time. And so if I'm somewhere and I'm having to wait, it's real easy to read on the phone. But you're right, I sort of dismissed it cognitively as, oh, that would never work for me. And then when I tried it, I thought, wow, this is much better than I thought.
Well, that sounded like kind of a life lesson.
Exactly.
What's the lesson?
Well, I think try to keep an open mind. And sometimes it's harder the older you get, because you tend to get set in your ways. It reminds me a little bit of my mother, in the early days saying, Gary, try these beats. You might like them.
So the iPhone 7 reading experience was like Beats.
Well, I still don't care for Beats, really, but the iPhone reading experience I've adopted.
I envy you, strangely. You commute about an hour to work, not every day, but how many days a week?
3 days a week, yeah.
So you've got an hour to work and an hour back.
Right.
What a luxury of time to listen to podcasts and audiobooks and all of that. What's your normal diet of things that you listen to, and how has it changed over the years?
Well, this job, which I've now had for like 5 years, is the longest commute I've had, I think, ever. So I do have more time in the car, and I've predominantly listened to podcasts during that time. I have an Audible subscription, and I keep accumulating Audible books, but it's like I can't get through the podcasts that interest me, and I hardly ever get to the Audible books unless I'm on vacation or something. But I have in addition to the Kindle Chronicles, which I follow, fortunately it's once a week, and so I can pretty much keep up with that. But I try to keep up with the New York Times, the Daily. The Washington Post has their afternoon version of that, Post reports. And then I really like James Hohmann's The Daily 202, which is a Washington Post podcast that comes out in the morning, usually around 8.
What is that? Is that a News Digest kind of a podcast?
It's a 10-minute... He has the big idea, and then he has 3 headlines that you should be aware of. And it's very much politically related, kind of the news of the day, politics, although not exclusively, like with the recent coronavirus, he's talking about that. But It's an interesting snapshot, and in this world we live in where it's very difficult to keep up with things that seem to happen on an hourly basis, it's in a 10-minute segment, I kind of get a dose of stuff, and then a lot of times the New York Times, the Daily, and then the Washington Post reports do more depth. I also listen to Krista Tippett. I like her On Being podcast. I listen to a couple of Buddhist-related podcasts because I'm interested in the kind of Buddhist psychology, not so much the history of Buddhism or some of the traditions in that sense, but I'm fascinated by sort of how you can use Buddhism in sort of a psychological way to understand yourself and sort of tame your own ego.
Any titles of podcasts in that category?
The Secular Buddhism podcast by Noah Rasheta is a real good basic kind of explainer podcast, and he's got well over 100 episodes, and very talkable, easy to listen to. And then there's a guy, Timber Hawkeye, that has a podcast. This is, I would say, more inspirational, maybe 5 or 6 minutes long. So those are two I try to keep up with.
I've been really impressed lately with the Daily, the quality of the production, and there's something about the intelligence of that host. I almost wonder if it ends up being more important than the Times itself. It's just like a whole new presentation, and their ability to draw. There was one this week I listened to about this amazing company that is essentially taking all of the facial recognition and just making a business and providing it to police departments. And the reporter was somebody who covers privacy as her beat for the last 10 years. So her understanding of it and the skill with which she teased out this story, it's different than reading a story either in print or online. It's much more vivid. I get. How would you compare what you're hearing in the Daily versus what you're reading in a more traditional way?
I agree with you. I think it's the Daily is more moving. You can get that human dimension that you don't necessarily see. I mean, with good writing, you can get that human dimension, but typical news reports, you don't necessarily get that. I remember you mentioned that episode, which I also heard. One that really moved me several years ago, Michael Barbaro was talking to a coal miner in, I think, West Virginia, who was no longer working, obviously had lung disease because you could hear the labored breathing, and yet he was defending President Trump's wanting to get the coal miners back to work. And Michael Barbaro kind of asked him the question, well, coal mining has really impaired your health. Do you think it was worth it? And he basically unequivocally said yes, that it had given him the means to raise a family, send his kids to school, and it was very moving.
I bet. Yeah, that's a good example. There was I had fun reading over some of the emails that we've exchanged, and there was when I interviewed Austin Kleon, Darlene and I both went to hear him at the Tatter Cover in Denver, and I'm just a big fan of that guy, and I'm raving about how great a chance to see this guy in person. And she said something about, well, I thought it was just all cliches, and then you wrote back a really thoughtful reply to that, and it was along the lines of, the essence of a happy life is simple concepts, but they're hard to live, right? And it's that tension between the obviousness of them and the putting them into practice. But can you say more about that? I mean, how do you, what does that look like in your own life when you accept that the goalposts are kind of simple, but it's really hard to live them?
Yeah, it's a good question, because I think we can get consumed with the busyness of our daily lives, and so we lose sight of some of those principles. We don't necessarily think about them, and so I think you have to, at least in my case, what I've tried to do is put more space in my day and try to intentionally reflect on some of these things and not get caught up in the busyness of, oh, here's my to-do list of 15 things. There's no way I can get it done, and start stressing out about that. And so I would say over the last, particularly 5 years in the role that I'm in now, I've been able to do that more so than previously in my career. And, I try to meditate every day, and I sort of have a mantra at the end of that period where I kind of think on sort of to me, the foundations of my spirituality, things like humility and gratitude, and just try to, even if I can't feel grateful in that moment, just, yes, I should be grateful. This is a wondrous experience that we have of this life. And we take it for granted, and yet, I don't know where I first heard this, maybe it was Buddhism or something else, but see something with a child's eyes, that newness, that excitement. And if we could view our lives that way, I think it would be easier to follow those simple cliches.
I've been experimenting for a while with taking 10-minute breaks. And not even in sort of, I did some Zen studies, the sort of formal stance. So just sitting in my chair, maybe having a coffee, but setting a timer for 10 minutes. So I just stop for 10 minutes. And it's just the sensation of whatever is bothering me settling, but also I really feel, am I sad, am I angry? And all of a sudden my body is sending me all this information when I just stop. And in 10 minutes... It usually resolves to some kind of a next step forward that, I got to make sure that this is done or whatever. And I think of it sort of as circuit breakers.
Yeah.
But as a meditator, do you have any sense of, is that God? What is happening through that simple process of just, as you say, putting space into your day?
I think you're, depending on what your religious beliefs are, you could see it as, a sense of God or divinity. You may see it as just being more in touch with yourself and the things that are so important. But you're talking about these 10-minute breaks reminds me, and this is one of those things that I can't say I've adopted. I've tried it a few times, and I think it's like you say, you've kind of decompress. But it's the Pomodoro Technique, where you work for 25 minutes and then take a 5-minute break. And I've done that a few times, and it's like, okay, everything kind of stills down.
Yeah. Yeah, I use that a lot. I use that a lot when I'm putting the show together, And I do 25, and then I have a 7-minute mindless Netflix TV show or something.
Right.
I put the carrot out there.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Do you think that you're happier now than when you graduated from DU?
I would say yes, definitely. No question. Of course, it's hard to put myself exactly in the place where I was, but my sense today of where I was is not a lot of confidence, pretty insecure. I had done well in school, so on paper at least, I felt like I was checking the boxes and doing well. I had a job to go to, but it was I didn't have the confidence of experience. And over the decades, as you get exposed to different things and you do different things, you gradually start to get more confidence in yourself and that you can handle certain things. So I would say definitely today, feeling more confident and I'd say more contented.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've experienced the same thing, but at some point in your life, the feeling that you're climbing the hill, there's this next promotion or this next job or whatever, kind of goes away. And it's like, okay, here's where I am, and I'm content with that. And you start to appreciate as you see getting older with parents dying and friends that may have serious issues or your own kids even encounter difficulties in life. That sense of gratitude and that we can't take this for granted, at least with me, brings a sense of some contentment. Yeah. And so I'd say, I don't think I'd want to go back to to just graduating from BU. It was an unsettled time.
Yeah, me too. I mean, sometimes I'd like to have the energy of a 20-year-old and
right.
some of the and maybe the possibilities, because sometimes I think, well, if I knew then what I know now, I would have taken some different decisions, but probably not.
Yeah, what is that Kierkegaard line? Life has to be lived forward, but you'd like to live it backwards or something?
Yeah.
You'd like to take the knowledge
right.
from your later years and apply it.
Exactly. But you do get to apply it each day, so that's
true.
That's almost as good. Mobile World Congress in Barcelona, I've heard about this as this kind of huge event, and you're heading there. And there's issues with the coronavirus to the point where you mentioned in a conversation, I think, that there's a protocol being suggested that people don't shake hands.
Right.
Tell me about what you hope to learn or accomplish at the conference and this brand new aspect of it, of the virus.
Well, first, Mobile World Congress, I don't know how long it's been held, but every year in Barcelona. Prior to that, it was in Cannes when it was a smaller conference. And it's all about the mobile industry. And it draws now well over 100,000 people. So compared to the Consumer Electronics Show, I think it's maybe the second largest technology show, or certainly in the top 5. And it draws the mobile operators and the equipment manufacturers that support them and all of the ecosystem. So it's a wonderful opportunity for a trade magazine like I work for to get a finger on the pulse. And of course, the last couple of years it's all been about 5G. 5G being defined and 5G coming and now 5G here and so forth. The question is, I think, will it happen? Every day it seems like more companies are dropping out. Ericsson and Nokia, 2 big equipment manufacturers, have both said that despite all the precautions and so forth, they're not going to be there.
They're not going to attend the conference because of the risk.
They're not going to attend the conference. I think, and a number of smaller companies have said the same thing. The GSMA, which is the organizing body for the conference, so far has not pulled the plug on it. But I understand they're going to have some kind of a meeting this week. So I think it may be 50-50 whether it happens or not.
Wow.
Just because of the risk. Is it necessary? Now, they also do 2 other conferences. They've expanded it to global. And sometime in early summer, they do one in Shanghai, which I think is questionable if they'll do that this year. And then in the fall, I think October, they've done one in Los Angeles. So even if this one doesn't happen, there'll be other conferences. And, of course, the companies that have pulled out have said they're going to, through other means, probably online, try to convey the information that they would otherwise have been telling people.
How do you assess the risk? Is it going to affect Nashua, or what do you think is coming?
Well, it's funny. It reminds me of that you talked to G Riddle, the author, about the book Pandemic, and I read that book after I heard your interview with him, and so I'm thinking, wow, this sounds very similar, although maybe not a nefarious plot. It's just a natural biologic thing, but it's a good question. I don't think they understand yet what the transmission is and the incubation. And obviously it's a concern if you can spread it without having any symptoms yourself. Yeah. And so I think, I'm not concerned about being in Nashua. I would be mildly concerned going to Barcelona. But again, I think you look at China with 1.2 billion people and how many people, I don't know what the current total is, but I think it's under 50,000. So again, it's you play with the numbers, and if you're one of the 50,000 or unfortunately one of the ones that dies, it's, the statistics were not in your favor.
Yeah, I think 10,000 people have died of the flu this season in the U.S.
Right. So. Right. It's interesting how we focus on certain things, and maybe disproportionately so.
We had some shared experiences. Your miniature Schnauzer Strudel passed away last year.
Yes.
And Claire, our Yorkie, passed away. We're in the midst of talking about whether to get another dog. and I tend to be a slow adopter on that idea. But have you gotten another dog?
No. And I don't know that we're at the talking point yet. I think, and not because it's necessarily too raw at this point. Certainly, it's difficult for me to come home still because I would be used to her meeting me at the top of the stairs and her little tail wagging. And so sometimes I'll come home, and we used to have this routine of after dinner, I'd bring her up into my lap sitting at the table, and I'd say, "Okay, Stu, let's talk about our days." And, so I still feel that void. But there's a lot of complexity also with having a dog, and my wife and I are trying to figure out, what's the next chapter in our lives, downsizing, and do we want to stay here or move somewhere closer to our kids or whatever. So I think that complicates the dog thing. If we get one, it'll be a smaller dog, maybe like Claire was.
Yeah.
That you can take on an airplane with no big deal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's the same with us. We're thinking about, shifting our base to Cambridge and not having the place in Denver and all of these things. The dog is a factor in all of the different scenarios.
Right.
Well, this has been wonderful, and thank you for this gear. I think it's almost as good as a Staples podcast studio.
Wow, well, that's high praise. I listened to that episode, and I think I told you that we do some podcasts at work, and there's one of the Staples that has this is not too far from our office. So I was thinking, I need to go there and see what it is, because if we start doing podcasting on a regular basis, that might be the best way to do it.
Well, and I think that woman offered a free hour in the studio to a Kindle Chronicles, so be sure you...
Absolutely.
When she said that, I said, well, I'm not sure we're going to be having lots, but it would make me very happy to have at least one person take them up on the offer.
Well, I'll take that on as a goal.
Okay.
And it's been wonderful to... I was very taken aback in a positive way when I got your message about, would you be the guest this week? I was like, oh my gosh, this is such an honor. I'm used to listening, not talking on the Kindle Chronicles.
And now you're on your commute, you'll be listening to yourself.
That's true, yeah.
Well, I'll look forward to that. I have been talking with Gary Lerude, technical editor at Microwave Journal. Thanks very much, Gary.
Thanks, Len. It's a real pleasure.
That's it for this week. Next week, I'm going to be talking with G Riddle, author of Pandemic, book 1 of Jerry's Extinction Files series. I spoke with him a little over a year ago about his books, and I've been in touch with him recently because of the outbreak of the coronavirus in China, and he's actually sent me some very useful information about precautions to take that have more to do with keeping your hands free from infection, or washing your hands a lot, sanitizing them, and not touching your face. So I thought it would be of interest to you to hear from someone who has done a lot of study about pandemics, and he did this in preparation for his book that Gary mentioned in our conversation, Pandemic, and he's graciously agreed to visit with me. We're going to be talking tomorrow afternoon, I think, and have a chance to catch up with his latest writing projects, as well as getting a very well-informed perspective on what might be ahead in the outbreak of that virus. On Monday coming up, Darlene and I will be traveling to Nevada. I'm trying to learn how to say the name of that state. And George W. Bush famously pronounced it incorrectly, and it took some political heat when he was competing in the Iowa caucuses. It's Nevada. And it's like aunt, not aunt. So anyway, we are headed to Nevada to work for Mayor Pete in the caucuses, and we might be driving some people. We've got some very interesting work ahead of us during 5 days that will be based in East Las Vegas, working on the campaign. There is a big family event coming up. We'll have a party on Sunday to celebrate my dad's 93rd birthday. That actually falls on February 18th in 4 days, and there'll be a gathering there to celebrate it. It'll be another one of the poignant family anniversaries and events without my mother, who passed away in August. This morning, I drove Dad on Valentine's Day over to the cemetery where she's buried in nearby Sudbury, and it's a wonderful spot because you can see, if you park near the family plot and the gravestone, you can see the church just over the hill where they were married in 1948. So when he sits there, he's got quite a remarkable wash of emotion, sadness, joy, and anticipation for what he believes is ahead, which is a chance to be reunited with her. And I'm sure she'll be with us in celebrating his 93rd birthday as well. So happy birthday, Dad. I'll be glad to celebrate that with you in a couple of days. This is Len Edgerly for the Kindle Chronicles in Cambridge, Massachusetts. I really appreciate your listening to my show. Bye.